Um, Thank you for joining us today at the final UQ Women in Engineering Challenging Yourself Professional Development Series. Today's workshop will be presented by Paul Gleeson and Matthew Roskam from Aurecon. My name is Trang Pham, and I'm a member of the UQ Women in Engineering Alumni Ambassador Council. I'm also a civil engineer at Aurecon. We have so much to say, but first, let's give thanks to the people who were here before us. The University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet, work, and live. On behalf of the University of Queensland, we pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants, who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. Their ways have taught us deeply from the living wisdom that surrounds us, the trees, plants, soils, air, and ocean, for it is there that we can truly learn. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australia and global society. For those who are joining us for the first time today, hi, we would like to briefly share some information about the Women in Engineering Alumni Council. The WEAC is made up of a passionate team of UQ alumni from various backgrounds, including Candice Lamb, our council chair, Mushfiq Rahman, our vice chair, Jennifer Ross, Karen Zhu, Kate Helitosis, Rick Murphy, and myself. As a council, we work in partnership with UQ to develop engagement activities for our fellow alumni. We hope to foster a sense of UQ community and support amongst engineering graduates and industry colleagues, both male and female, who in turn will continue to help build a diverse path for future engineers. We all truly love what we do and enjoy having this opportunity to collaborate with our university and contribute to supporting an important change across our industry. I'd like to now run through a few general housekeeping points to note on which are the slides on your screen now, wherever it may be. Today's session is being recorded. You may have noticed that all attendees are muted and unable to share video. Sorry. This is just the way the session has been set up to help us manage such a large number of people participating and preserve the bandwidth as best as possible. We're happy for you to ask questions during the session, and we've allocated some time at the end of the session for a live Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, just click on the Q&A button, which can be found at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and type in your question. With such a large group, we may not be able to get through all of your questions, so our apologies in advance. If you are having any technical problems, please click on the chat icon, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen, to let us know, and we'll do our best in the background to help. I'd now like to introduce our partners, our presenters for today, Paul Gleeson and Matthew Roskam from Aurecon, who will be hosting a panel discussion on balancing your personal and company values. Paul, say hello, Paul. Paul is the Managing Director of Aurecon's Energy, Resources and Water business. With 24 years experience, Paul has worked across all aspects of the energy sector and is passionate about creating a sustainable future for the ERW industries, helping the sector's transition to a more customer-centric model and driving the country's transition to a low-carbon future. Matthew, hello. Matthew is Aurecon's Global Design to Innovate lead for the energy, resources, and manufacturing markets. With over 10 years of mechanical engineering experience in the resources and manufacturing sector, he blends logic and processes with user-centric design thinking to provide sense and clarity. I would like to say before we start that this event isn't sponsored by Aurecon. It may seem like it with 3 Aurecon speakers. However, I asked Paul and Matt to speak. This is my personal story. They don't know this, but when I first came to Aurecon from the public sector, from TMR, it was actually the first time that I started receiving work that wasn't aligned to my values. And to me, that was such a big shock. And a big part of my journey in navigating it was actually through my interactions with Paul and Matt, how they navigated a controversial industry like mining, but maintaining their authenticity and keeping true to their values. And that has helped me a lot, hence why they're speaking with us today. However, we will now hand it over to Paul and Matt. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Frank. That was what an intro, eh? Okay, Paul, how you doing?
Good, mate, good.
Hey, so I hope everyone else is doing well out there as well. Look, to kick things off today, what we'd ask you to do is just try and find something to write on. A bit of pen, paper, you might be able to type at your computer on a tablet. Maybe don't go with the hands. It might be a little bit too small, but who knows. And as Trang mentioned, we're keen for questions all the way through, hey? So please, if you have a question, please just type it into it. We'll try and answer them as we go, but if we don't, we'll also set some time at the back end as well to get through them. All right, so while you're looking for your piece of paper, Paul, we probably should provide a bit more context just around, I guess, the values piece. The last two challenge yourself sessions have largely been around external influences. So in the first one, you may remember if you were there, we looked at using the behaviors and how you can use them and to work with other people and their preferences. And then the last session, we took a bit of a science-based look at networking and some of the big and the small things that you can do to work together with people and to create a really robust team. So those are generally all sort of external things. And this internal discussion that we'll have today is something that we can shape a little bit easier. It's something that helps us sort of guide our path through. So that's, I guess, the way that, Paul, you've used it through your life, and certainly I've started to use it as I've realized just how important it is. So to get things started, Trang, can you pop that values table up on the screen? Awesome. We'll leave this up for a little while. And what we'd like you to do, just take some time to read through some of these values that are up there. It's not complete by any means. There's a bunch that are missing. Like, I think we were having a chat about this yesterday, Trang. There's encouragement and power and justice and fun and kindness and all sorts of things that are missing from up there. So if you're reading through it and you go, there's something that really speaks to me but isn't up there, feel free to add it. But what we'd like you to do for now is just, as you're reading through, pick 5 values that really speak to you, that really resonate you. When you read it, you go, oh yes, that's really important to me. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. But for now, just have a bit of a read through it and get your head around what the content is. So I've run through and done something similar to this a couple of times. And a couple of the things that have popped up for me are really like supportiveness and contribution. Paul, I don't actually think we've spoken about this before, but those two things, like being able to help people and making a positive influence in their life, is something that really is quite strong for me. And I think when I look at the work that I'm doing now and some of the work that I've done in the past, the stuff that I've really done well, I probably aligns to those quite nicely. And I don't know, what's your core value?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Trang, for that nice intro as well. So I think for me, the central thing, which is about values and purpose for me, is sustainability. But I think if you look at the more traditional value labels, if you like, to me, what's in the sustainability one for me is really around justice or fairness.
Yeah, nice.
And in terms of why that matters to me, it's that's at the core in terms of what's fair for everyone. So go straight to one of the biggest issues for me, which is climate change. Then in terms of what's fair for everyone on the planet, what's fair for other forms of life on the planet, what's really going to provide fairness and justice for everyone there. So that to me is probably at the heart of it.
And I guess that's pretty important given where you sit and some of the stuff that you've done in the past, right? That whole energy transition piece at the moment, there's a real strong talk about that just transition for everyone, I guess, rather than just those broad statements. Like, have you, I guess, if you think back across your career, are there any of those times that you've perhaps been challenged? And perhaps use that? Yeah.
many. So I think some of the things I was keen to share in this discussion today is just that, and I'm going to use, I guess, my own journey as the example, but there are so many different value sets that hopefully everyone who's listening in can superimpose their own on that. So if it seems I'm talking a lot about the one thing, that's because I can really only talk authentically to my experience. But I think it really does translate for any value alignment or misalignment. And so yes, I've am challenged regularly. And I think that I look at it now from a perspective of something Trang said to me a little while ago about what's the more positive way of framing these things. So rather than just the more negative question around where's there a misalignment, and I will talk about that for sure, but I think what I think is probably a little bit more uplifting is what happens when you get alignment, and what can you unleash, what can you unleash in yourself if you can actually really get strong alignment between your values, you know, what really matters to you, and then get some alignment between that and the place you work and the work you're doing. That's the exciting part. But there's certainly... Have you got an example of that at the moment? Yeah, well, look, I mean, the work that I get to do now, most days, is extremely aligned with what matters to me. As you know, you talked about the energy transition as a classic example. So the bulk of the why behind the energy transition is about responding to climate change. So there are lots of other things that have to be tackled, but if you look at the why are we shifting where our energy is coming from? The bulk of it is a story around decarbonising our energy sector and everything that underpins our the way our communities, the way our societies operate. So that work I get to do in that space for me now is extremely fulfilling. And I think it's probably obvious now when you look at how far along that journey we are, the acceptance of the fact that the transition is happening and needs to happen. There's still obviously a little bit of resistance in other sectors, but in broad terms, the transition is happening. It wasn't so obvious in the early days of my career. So I think that's some of the reflection I did when first asked whether I'd talk about this.
Well, let's talk about one of those examples then, because I know there are some times in your lives when you've actually made quite the pivot. Because it didn't quite align to your values. Have you got one that you can share?
Yes, yeah, there's a few. I think probably the more significant ones for me have been where I've actually chosen to change employer, you know, leave a company to go and work around. And I don't do that lightly. I've only had 3 employers in 24 years, so I don't jump around that much. And so for me, in the early days of my career, I always wanted to work in energy. I knew that before I even started uni. And so when I came out of uni all those years ago, if you wanted to work in that space, you ended up doing what I did, which was, you know, designing and building coal-fired power stations. And that was extremely fulfilling from an engineering point of view. And I hadn't even heard the phrase climate change, and we were all quite oblivious to it, to be honest, in my sphere. But, you know, as the years progressed, you know, I started reading more and seeing more and realizing that, you know, all of a sudden CO2 was a problem. And, you know, this was not probably the future that I wanted to be part of, but I needed employment. I was learning great things from an engineer's perspective and from a project delivery perspective. And I respected the company and the team. There was no issue there, but I just had this feeling in me about, this is about the misalignment thing, about, I don't know that this is what I want to do long term. So I went looking for, you know, firstly within our company, you know, are we going to get involved with what at the time it was always called alternative energy, rather than renewables or future energy, or the terms we have now was called alternative back then because it was fringe maybe. And yeah, I kept getting an answer saying, no, we're not going to do that. You know, not to say it's not happening, but more, we're a business, we've got to focus on what we're good at and we're going to build these things. And so after persevering for a little while, I thought it's time to look around. And so ultimately I did.
That's quite a big, that's a quite a bold step or way to resolve the issue. And it sounds like there was some, I guess, some stuff that came or led up to that point as well. Like how did you navigate through that process of sort of understanding, is this going to be resolved? Am I going to be able to go and do some of the renewable stuff or the alternative stuff?
Yeah, so I think when I look back at the early stages of my career, it's easy, you know, it's sometimes easier telling the story looking back that many years because you can frame it in a way that makes you seem really like you had it all together. But I certainly was like everyone else, bumbling around a little bit and trial and error of how to raise topics. And first up, probably didn't raise them the right way, and then eventually figured out how to do that a bit better. But the thing that I wanted to share, and I still really do this all the time to this day, which is how well have you tested that your values are misaligned? Is that actually what's going on? So you got that funny feeling like I'm not quite comfortable with what the company I'm working for is doing, or what have you. Have you tested whether that's a values misalignment from an objective way? Do you know that that is the view all the way to the top? Do you know what the board and the CEO have said is the direction for them and what the value set is there? Or are you just making some assumptions based on the team within a team within a team that you sit, which is where I was down in the organisation back then, in that organisation. And and actually, you know, sometimes you'll find, in fact, probably quite often you'll find that there isn't such a misalignment there. You might have people in between you and the top of the organisation who are actually steering things in a direction that isn't where the company wants to go. So, which is why I think it is so important to find a constructive way to ask the questions, to even make suggestions, to try and test that stuff before you go making a big call. Because, yeah, you know, obviously your career is fundamental to you know, to being able to have, you know, provide the life you want. So you've got to really be sure you've thought those things through and tested them hard. So
how did you actually test those? Did you rely on I guess on a mentor, or did you chat to your colleagues or friends, or like that? It's a big thing to talk about your values with someone else to test it. How did you go about it?
Yeah, back then it was a bit weird because it wasn't a mainstream topic the way it is now. So there was a bit of a response of why are you worrying about this stuff and what. And so yeah, I definitely have sought out mentors throughout my career, and that's really been key, because a good mentor will definitely put those questions back to you in a way that tests that, you know, where is this coming from? Is this really, is this your issue, you know, or is it the company's issue? And I think, but you've got to be able to engage with the leadership in whatever organisation or department or business or whatever you're in, and these days leadership structures are far more open to that as well. I think it's leaders are more accessible than they were then. You don't need to be in the same city to be able to get some airtime and do that. So it's extremely important. And to be honest, the thing I've learned now that I am, I guess, in a more senior position myself is it's invaluable to leaders to hear that stuff, because sometimes leaders will be horrified to find that someone's lived experience in their organisation is that, you know, is actually misaligned.
Have you seen that change? I guess it sounds like you've seen movement in the area, but from when you were sort of younger or just joining the industry, have you seen that change at all?
The accessibility, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is the importance of everyone realising at every stage of their career they can influence these things. And I think that's often most of us limit ourselves a bit in that regard. Or you assume that, oh, you know, I'm just a graduate engineer who wants to listen to me, or I'm not going to put a challenging question to the CEO as a graduate, or those sorts of fairly understandable perspectives. And actually, I look at a lot of the shifts that have occurred in big corporates. A lot of that's been driven from within. So again, if I stick to the subject matter I know, which is around sustainability, climate change, transition risk, all of that stuff, a lot of it comes from feedback from bottom up, in terms of this is what our people want. Our people actually want to work for a brand that is associated with these things. And that's about, it is because I think it's more aligned to most people's value set. And I think for me, you know, having to move from just a career in the energy sector to in the last few years now being far more involved with the resources sector, water sector, these issues are just as important for people in those industries as they are, you know, for someone who's in a company that builds wind turbines. It's not a simple black and white, right or wrong.
Yeah.
Discussion.
Have you got any advice perhaps for people who may want to raise these topics with someone that's perhaps a bit more senior? Or I guess the mentoring way is an approach, and you can probably go out and find someone that is aligned to your values to mentor you. But if you actually want to have that talk with someone a bit more senior than you, have you got some advice for people who want to start having these chats?
Yeah, I think some of the basics are, every entity, whether it's whether it's government or private sector, will have somewhere a document that outlines, this is our strategy, this is our business plan, whatever you want to call it. These are the things that matter. It should probably have some stuff in there about values and behaviours that we expect of each other. Have a look at that stuff. And if you read that and that's misaligned with how you feel, then yes, you've got a problem, right? And so that's something to raise. But I think more likely you'll look at that document and you'll go, yeah, well, if my lived experience was like this document, I wouldn't feel so misaligned.
Okay.
So then that's your chance to go and raise it with someone as senior as you like. And if you do it in a constructive way, you can go to the very top, right? If you do it in a really constructive way, saying, hey, I care, I like working here. I want to achieve things. I'm, passionate about these things, but I feel like what we've said here is our, what our organisation's all about. It's not what I experience on a day-to-day basis, or I can't reconcile that we've said these things here, and yet this is the work we're doing, or these are the behaviours in my team, or whatever it is. You will find very few senior leaders would give you a negative response to that. They would generally be very pleased that they've got a window into what's actually going on. We've got someone in our business who's recently completed a master's in sustainability and all around sustainability leadership, and that was a fascinating thing to look at, because she went around and interviewed board members and CEOs, and then multiple layers through each organisation to look at where do things fall over when board might set a strategy here, but then in terms of what the business actually does is quite different. So where does it fall apart? And that actually is very, very common, not just for sustainability, but any kind of strategy, is that set up here, that makes sense, that looks great. And then as you go through to what happens in operations, it doesn't reflect it, and so somewhere in the chain of command, either someone's not implementing that correctly, or they're not, they haven't taken the time to understand themselves. The visibility from someone right up at the board level who signed that off is not there. They can't see why it's not happening. And again, so that's the value of you putting your hand up and saying, hey, I want to understand this, and you frame it in that way. I guarantee you'll get an audience. And again, from a career progression and visibility point of view, these things are valued. They might not have been so much 20 years ago, but I see, certainly in our firm, but all the client firms we work with, and there's a lot of them, I see that culture is pretty common, that people who want to constructively engage with senior leadership get noticed, get remembered. So I guess what I'm trying to say with all that is it's a fairly low regrets choice to have a go.
To actually have that chat.
Yeah.
Look, I'm keen just to dig in a little bit further on that, but we might just take this moment to ask everyone to look at their list that they've written down in front of them. Hopefully you've got a list of 5 or so values or I guess things that really resonate with you. I'd just like you to have a bit of a look and rank them from 1 to 5. So 1 being the thing that resonates the most with you, your core value, down to things that are still important, but perhaps less so. It really, I guess what we're trying to do here is just say that while there are some things that are important to you, there may be others that are perhaps slightly more important to you. So while you're doing that, Paul, Sarah's asked a really good question about how you balance your personal values and your job satisfaction. Like if you enjoy the type of work but don't know if the outcome really aligns with your values, how do you navigate through that? Because that's quite a difficult. That's quite difficult sometimes. You mentioned that with your engineering at the start too.
Yeah, and I think that's still the case. And I think that in the example that I'm giving, so let's talk things that are either contributing what you might perceive as positively or negatively to tackling climate change. it's such a complex pathway. Like if we say, you know, let's hope the world's on a pathway to be net zero by 2050. That's a target that all state governments in Australia have signed up to. New Zealand governments.
Just to help for perhaps those that aren't in the energy, net zero is net zero emissions?
Net zero, yeah, CO2 emissions. Yeah, so, and that's largely the science tells us we have to do that if we've got any hope of sort of achieving a 1.5 to 2 degree world, you know, so a livable world. So if you look at that and you go, okay, how can we get there? And obviously if we can get there faster, that's great, but we have to get there, and we have to get there in a way that ensures that everything still works, because obviously, you know, I still need the fridge to run downstairs and this to work so I can talk to you. And so the system has to be kept stable the whole way through that transition, you know. And so a lot of our work is figuring out, well, how fast can you get there? What are the bits you can accelerate? But it's not as though everything from the old world, you know, the tech that underpinned, you know, the last 100 years of development, it's not as though that tech, it's not a good and evil conversation. Like that was all we knew at the time. That's what we had. So those things still need to run, you know, and they will come down and down and down as the new stuff comes up and up and up. But if you do those two lines, everything on those two lines is equally important, because they add up to the whole system working. So even if you're the person working on that last asset that gets turned off, as in fossil fuel asset, you're still doing a vital job, because you're keeping the system going until the very last new build zero emission thing comes online. So they're both essential. And so to me, reconciling what you do is about understanding that. So if that's an issue that matters to you, is to get deeply embedded in understanding the role that these things play. And I think this is something that I've found really interesting, you know, that for a long time in my career, that not a long time, probably the last sort of 10 years of my career, the stuff that I've been working on, a lot of people are interested in it because it's the stuff that's on the new side of the energy transition. And I've spoken at different forums. I had a classic one last year where it was a climate change forum, and I gave some examples, you know, at the end, and then someone, you know, question from the floor, someone said, I love that story about the Tesla big battery, Hornsdale in South Australia. That's really cool. You know, what you got to do on that. It's a shame that you're also working in mining, you know. And so I thought this is a really interesting question, because to me, I look at it and say, but we can't build the world's biggest battery without a whole lot of lithium. And unfortunately, lithium's got to come out of the ground at the moment. And so it's actually, how do you do that in a zero emissions way? How do you do that in a sustainable way?
So it's where you fit into that bigger picture, or perhaps it's not just this thing that you're doing down here. There's a whole ecosystem of things that are happening as well.
Yeah, and this is about what I mean by testing the misalignment that you feel. And it may be real as well. I'm not saying that everything is justifiable, because everything's not justifiable. There are things going on right now. There are sectors, industries, you know, players that you probably think have a hard time working there, because I can't align those two things. But can I just, Matt, for a sec, talk about the more positive aspect of this that I mentioned at the start? Yeah. So I guess my reflection in terms of my own career progression, it hasn't been linear, hasn't been smooth, and I think rarely it is for people. But actually at the core of it, when I think about it, is this whole thing about seeking out the alignment is what's allowed me what's moved me twice to companies.
Yeah.
It's also probably raised my profile quite a bit, because in the search to try and find that, you're asking a lot more questions, you know, you're challenging, you're trying to understand, find your way through. But also every time I get to do a bit more work that was aligned to what I cared about, I'd be so much more engaged, so much more passionate. And that to me is actually the key message that I wanted to share today, is that when your work is aligned to your values, and that's really your purpose, then that's when you start to bring some passion to the surface. And I really think passion is the key, because that's what gives you impact. And impact is what allows you to actually get things done, make a difference, get people to come with you. That's a big one, you know. I mean, leadership starts very early in your career. So if you've got that, then you're away. And if you don't, I think it's hard to have people come with you. You won't have, you know, when you talk about leadership or followership, I mean, I'm not going to follow someone who I don't think is authentic to their beliefs.
Yeah.
And most of us are like that. So I think, to me, just really important to understand why I think this is a big deal. It's not just being able to sleep at night. It's actually also a question about how you get ahead, how you progress.
Yeah. Okay. But so let's just dig into that a little bit more. What started first? I guess it sounds like from a young age you were quite keen, looking at that justice piece and about that just transition. Is that what led you to get to this path? Like, if you hadn't have, I guess, what am I trying to say? If you hadn't risen up the ranks, would you still feel comfortable that you're on the right path, or is it the fact that you've now got this outlet to actually chase this down that's led you to where you are today?
I think, like anything, when you're retelling your own history, it looks a lot better than it actually did. It's, like I said, it's definitely not a straight line, but it's really clear to me that that's been the catalyst. Has been each opportunity, each thing has been driven by that passion on that topic. And like I said, I think passion comes from when you align that, values, purpose, and your work. And you can't always, look, there's a huge list of values that you flashed up, and that's probably 1/20th of the values set that's out there in the world, right?
Absolutely.
It's not all of them are going to align with something you can do for a living. That's, you can, I guess, make sure that nothing bad is being done or nothing totally misaligned, but in terms of, is there actually a role for you that really strongly aligns with that? That's one question. And so your question was, would I feel that way if I hadn't?
Is it the pull of the attribute that's sort of, or the value that's taking you to today?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, well, look, I certainly didn't start my career seeking out leadership roles. I was really passionate about being an engineer. I loved that. And in fact, my first couple of years of being a design engineer, doing really complex, detailed design stuff that was getting built, I thought, this is all I want to do forever, right? I just loved that at that point in time. I didn't sort of look at my equivalent, the managing director of that business, and think, I want that job. I was like, no, this is great. So it's interesting how, I guess, the desire to contribute, I think was the word you used early on, like, what's your contribution, what difference you make? As my career's gone on, I realized that I can have more and more contribution or make more and more impact by having leadership roles, by being able to shape things, because then I can shape how much of the work that we do, that Aurecon does in this space, is aligned with that stuff. And then you get this, virtuous circle that people refer to, where it starts to snowball, and you find that the people that want to work with you are, coming for that reason. And other people self-select as well. There are people who haven't loved the direction I've taken things, and that's totally fine too. As I said, I don't think there's a good and evil in this scenario. There's just different priorities.
So those people that perhaps might not agree with you, how do you work with them, or have you got any tips in terms of how to work best or collaborate best with people who may have slightly different values than you have?
Yeah, look, and I think for this topic, you can work around that. I think if some of your other values are misaligned, I'm just looking at the list here, but if you are misaligned on some fundamental things about how to treat other humans, for example, that's going to be hard to find a long-term workaround for that. If you've got a boss, for example, who's that's hard. But in the stuff I'm talking about, what I've learned over time, having talked to some hostile audiences, for example, on the topic of tackling climate change, is really important to understand where they're coming from. And for me, realizing early on that they're not actually hell-bent on destroying the planet. It's just that in their priority stack, they're weighing up being able to feed their kids over me trying to accelerate a transition. And of course, then you start to realize we're probably not that misaligned on values. It's just that the priorities and the impact of this stuff on them is quite different to what it is for me. And so, again, I think that's a really good thing to test when you feel that in your job. Where are they coming from? Why are they? Why do it feels to you like they're on a different side of the argument to you? Why is that?
Yes. So putting yourself in someone else's shoes, almost.
That's a shorter way of answering it. Yes. So that is absolutely it, and forcing yourself to do that. And I said, for me, I've actually made that. I think that's that's gone for me from a real weakness to a forced strength.
Okay.
For a long time, I would avoid reading media from certain sources that I thought would wind me up the wrong way. Now, actually, that's the main stuff I read. I don't really bother the stuff that's aligned with my view is nice and makes me feel good, but I'm not gaining a whole lot of perspective. I'm better to go and read the stuff that's trying to push the other agenda, because then I can understand more. What are the gaps? What are the things that I need to help close to get some of those people over the line? So definitely, yeah, forcing yourself into those shoes, even if you don't particularly like the person in the shoes, that you need to do it.
That's a really interesting thing, because I think I'm sitting here just reflecting on what I normally read, and it's normally there's almost like a confirmation bias against sort of my own viewpoint. And I think whenever I've gone out and actively sought the other side, I've probably walked away feeling a bit more confident that I actually know what I'm talking about, or that I can actually discuss it, which has then made that little bit of a bit more confidence in myself, I guess, and helped me to just push it that little bit further.
Exactly.
Nice. There is a great question from Frank. I was going to leave it for a little bit later, but I actually am keen to ask it. Has your values and priorities changed as you've moved sort of through, the direct question is into management and ER, energy resources and water. But I guess more broadly, Frank, have your values changed through your life, or have the core value been reasonably the same?
I don't think, I'm look, and I'm not an expert on values, but I have read a lot on the topic, and I don't think it changes that much. I think definitely how important these things are comes and goes a bit. And I think it's, there's certainly a bit of Maslow's hierarchy here, right? So back to my example before, if you're sort of on the brink of being able to survive, then values alignment is, slightly down the thing. But most of us living in this country have enough headroom that that this stuff is quite a way up there. And so, no, I don't think it's changed. I think that the core value, this thing around, for me, I've figured out what it's around is justice and fairness. And usually, the way I know, like when I feel a bit tight in the guts, like something's bothering me, something's not right, and whether that's something that's gone on, in our business or in industry or with something else I'm involved in, I have to sit down and think, why do I feel like that? What is it? And it's usually something around, I've perceived that something's not fair, not just, and someone's not been, the outcome's not right.
Okay.
And so I guess in my career, that's become very much around sustainability, but the core value of fairness and justice, I think, has never really changed. One thing I would say though, is when I test it, sometimes my assessment of what's fair and just is not a neutral one.
Okay.
So I could really be fired up thinking, what's happened over there to that person? That's not right. That's not fair. Yep. But actually, that's just my subjective view without a whole lot of information. And so as I force myself to go and look at some of those things, I often find, okay, there's a reason why that's happened and it wasn't misaligned. And occasionally it is misaligned, and then there's a great chance for you to get involved and say, hey, this needs to be looked at differently, need a different outcome. And I think part of that actually, it was triggered when I was in last week's session listening to Dr. Kimball on this topic around, how are teams formed, the choices that get made, the unconscious bias that exists in organisations. Someone somewhere in those rooms probably has that feeling that I'm talking about, like, oh, I'm not sure about this, and do you take the time to figure out why that is, and then revisit and say, actually, I'm not comfortable that we put the right person on that job, or the person that ended up, we gave the project management gig to, not sure that decision was made based on merit. It might have been based on some unconscious bias, and so again, listen to that. He's an engineer telling you to listen to your feelings. So I think that's it's important.
So if you're in those conversations, what would be your advice to someone? So on the call, we'll likely have a range of people from, sort of junior and grad, right the way through to people that are sitting in those rooms having those conversations. What would be your advice to them?
So someone who's feeling that way about the conversation, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, go back to how's your business said it's going to make decisions, right? And a lot of, not just business or government or department or whatever, wherever you work, university for that matter, you will have somewhere something that says, these are our behaviours, these are our values. This is what we're about. This is how we make decisions. So have a look at that and then test it and say, I'm not actually sure. And again, keep it constructive. You won't achieve anything by going straight at the bias. I mean, flagging someone's unconscious bias is certainly not something you do in a group for the first time. And so that process of saying, okay, well, is this how it's meant to work here? Let me test. What does it say? There'll be business procedures as well about how people are selected. Is anyone actually looking at those things? Because often, in business you have these things, but decisions just get made. They get made more quickly than that, and they get made. Sometimes they're made before everyone's even in the room, because whoever's got slightly more authority or a louder voice on that topic will potentially push through what they think is the right outcome. And again, they're not necessarily a force of evil. They're just they're pushing what they think is right, and then it takes other people to constructively put their hand up and go, and we talk through why that is best, and what are the implications of doing that, etc.
So because that's quite a businessy, at the risk of calling on being a businessy answer, that is quite a businessy answer. But I think you use the tools that are at your disposal, and if you feel comfortable to talk to someone openly about it, that's a tool you can use. But I guess the corporate strategy and the charter or whatever you have in your company is just yet another tool that you can use to have that conversation. It's almost, again, giving you permission to actually talk those things through.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry for the fully business answer, but I guess, again, that's something I've learned the hard way, is that if you come at something from a more emotive perspective, which I've done in previous, in fact, the company I was with before this one, so going back nearly 10 years, there were things going on in terms of exactly that, around progression and people getting opportunities ahead of other people, that I felt really strongly about. And by raising it in a really emotive way with our CEO at the time, I actually put the calls backwards quite a distance, because that person was a very, what's the word? Just a very procedural, very cut and dried individual. So when I came in being all emotional about something, he just switched off, because he doesn't engage with that. And so to me, going back to, well, hang on a sec, if I'd gone in there and said, well, you're the CEO, you own this document that says this is how we behave, this is how we make decisions, I'm concerned that what we've just done here doesn't align with this, that would have gone very differently than me going in just expressing the emotional misalignment that I felt. And I very much experienced that in the day-to-day work I do now on this sustainability topic. If we work with a client on tackling climate risk, it is pitched at not me going in saying, let's all come together and save the planet, because that might be the why deep within me. But the why for them is, we've got to manage this risk for the shareholders of our business. That's the responsibility of a director. And so climate is just another risk for that business. And to do a good job as a director, they need to tackle that risk, put some plans in place. What are we doing? So going in on that level, rather than save the world, it's the right thing to do, gives me an audience, gives me a chance to actually have an influence and make the difference. So I think it's important to say, yes, okay, a bit of business chat, but you have to work to your audience.
I guess that's probably true, isn't it? That is. Yeah. Look, we're mindful that we've sort of got about 13 odd minutes left. What I'd be really keen to hear back from everyone on the call sitting at home is what your core value is. What was your number one value that you came up with? And because we're on Zoom, sort of the only way we can really do that is via the chat. So if you feel comfortable, I'd love for you just to type your favorite, or what your core value was, into the chat window, and just have a read at what other people have come up with as well. Paul, there's an awesome question there from Han. which is, how do you seek alignment of core values with overseas parent companies?
Yeah, okay. I have experienced that issue again in a previous company, and that is hard because, well, back to my point earlier about accessibility of senior leadership. If you work for an organisation and the actual headquarters or even the parent, these days with endless acquisitions, you can find it. You start off here in an organisation, and then that gets swallowed, and that gets swallowed, and before you know it, you're 20 tiers away from senior leadership, and they're in a jurisdiction where priorities are different or value sets are different, and that is hard. Again, I mean, obviously, I'm going to say same process. Test what it says at a global corporate level that we're about. If you're misaligned with that, then yeah, you probably do need to have a look and have a think about whether that's a gap you can close or whether you need to look around. I think you can still reach out. You can still engage with senior leadership, but again, depending what country you're talking about and what part of the world, it's not the same everywhere. I mean, the culture that's evolved in a lot of Australian businesses in the last decade, where for example, CEOs are making themselves a lot more available. They'll engage on internal social media platforms like Yammer. That's not necessarily the norm in some Asian countries where I've worked. It's not the norm in some parts of Europe. So, I guess a lot of what I've said is easier for an Australian-based person or organisation. But you can still absolutely test it. And I think, again, you've got to have access to leadership here. I think the most common misalignment I've come across with people is with their immediate line manager or with the team they're sitting in, and often that, and particularly from a behaviours point of view, when I've been involved with that, trying to resolve that for people in terms of how people treat each other and the language that's used or whatever it might be. That is definitely not representative of what the organisation wants to be. That's a behaviour that's developed in one team, sometimes because of one person. Either the leader is a bit off or the leader's a bit weak and is allowing inappropriate, behaviour and stuff to go on. And so that values misalignment about seeing that going on needs to be fixed for that team. You don't have to fix that as the person in the team, but you always need to have access. One of my first mentors told me that about the importance of having relationships 2 levels up and 2 levels down in whatever structure you're in. And that's for exactly this reason, for when things are a bit off. You don't want that to be the first time you've reached out to that person 2 levels up. Is the first time you've ever engaged with them is to say, big problem here. If that's the only, I mean, you do it if you need to do it, of course. But well, I guess what I'm saying is it's one of the reasons to be building those relationships all the time, wherever you go, wherever you move.
And I guess that's the same, not only, I guess, in the seniority, but that's all very, I guess, a personal perspective too, isn't it? So I guess that helps grow that cultural perspectives and perhaps the gendered perspectives and the differences that come in through, I guess, your own personal background and the people that you're dealing with as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the values, if you look at some of the values, and it's nice to see people's values flashing up on the screen.
Ones coming
it's
through.
Good.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Cool.
And some of those are kind of, for me, they're probably like the base requirement to be able to actually want to come to work. Some of those things need to be there. And then there's what are the things that are actually the next level, the things that are would take you from being, I've got a good job, I like doing my job, to actually I'm deeply passionate about what I'm doing. I'm highly engaged. I'm going the extra mile because of that alignment. That's the thing that I'd love people to explore a bit more, because, as I said, my own reflections about how have I had opportunities. Actually, I don't know if we have time for another short example.
Short amount of time.
Okay.
Yep. Very short amount of time.
Okay. Some of the opportunities I've got now or have had in terms of roles and responsibility are purely because I've asked a question about why is our business silent on X or Y? And then only to find it wasn't an intentional omission, it was a response of, yes, good point, would you like to take that on? And so I think those surprises can happen to anyone at any level, so long as you're willing to squeeze yet another thing into your already full day. It's often by asking that question that you create opportunities for yourself.
We have 2 remaining questions. We'll ask one. We are running short on time, so if we don't quite get the second one sorted, I apologise. But someone's asked, do you have any advice on resolving safety issues when there's pushback from the company resolving the issue due to cost, and perhaps hasn't previously led to any incidents?
Yeah, look, so safety for all of us should be a pass-fail scenario. And again, with where responsibilities land for directors, I would be very surprised if you raising an issue with safety is misaligned with what the top of your organisation thinks. And certainly if you feel that cost is being prioritised over safety, that I can't think of any organisation that would last too long if that was the case. But again, you've got to be open to the possibility that is your assessment complete? Is it exhaustive? Are you 100% right in your view that this is a very high risk situation? So I think you've got to flag it and you take it up.
This is probably another one that also talks about your business plan. Like safety will be written into almost every blueprint or charter or strategy document ever. It's certainly one that you can pick up and say, if we're actually true to this, then this should be something that we should be focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clara has also asked a question, and I'm just going to, Paul, you're going to have to go quick on this one, mate. Can you talk about how you're pursuing sustainability in your job today? And Clara, this is something Paul can talk about underwater for hours and hours and hours. So if there's a very, very short answer, Paul.
Okay. So look, in terms of my primary role, so Managing Director for Energy and Resources and Water, that is all about, so in the energy space, that's about making sure our role, our brand is all about being front and center of driving the energy transition. So how do we accelerate the uptake of renewables? How do we make the network actually operate in a stable way as we transition away from thermal generation? Resource sector is all about working with particularly the tier 1 companies that have set themselves a net zero target. So how do we help companies like BHP take a heavy haul mining operation to net zero? How do we accelerate technologies like hydrogen to replace diesel, etc.? So my job is actually trying to build our brand in that space, to recruit people who can do that work, to go out into the market and win that work with our clients and then do that stuff. And then the other one, in terms of the example I gave before about asking a question, well, a couple of years ago, I flagged with our CEO that I couldn't see clearly where Aurecon had stated its position on climate change, and I felt that we needed to do that because it underpins a whole bunch of decisions about what we want to work on. Bill looked at that and said, yep, you're right. Do you want to take that on? And so I thought, okay, I wasn't expecting that. Yes. And so then took on that task of firstly doing something about the sustainability performance of Aurecon's internal business, and then also about building an offering that helps clients with their own sustainability strategy, journey, climate change, etc. So things like getting our company to sign up to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and then setting our own emissions targets, and then anyway, lots and lots of stuff that only happened because I asked the question, really.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. And I appreciate the succinct answer, because I know that is literally the thing that we could talk for hours and hours on. Clara, and I'm sure if you want to reach out, Clara, Paul would be happy to respond via LinkedIn or absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. Trang, we'll hand back to you. Thank you so much. But I just want to say before we hand back, I was scrolling through the chat window with all the different values that have popped up, and it's really impressive to read. I must say there's a very diverse spectrum in there, so it's quite refreshing to actually see all those come through. I feel for anyone that's currently has adventure as one of their core values. Not an easy thing at the moment. Thanks, Trang.
Thank you so much, Paul and Matt. It has been an incredible hour with you. And thank you everyone for participating and sharing your values with us. And we hope that you've taken some useful insights, information. I know for me, Paul's line of building relationships 2 levels up and 2 levels down really resonated with me, especially after hearing what Kim Ball was saying last week about creating networks, about just moving outside your comfort zone, because you never know where it will take you. That really emphasizes it. I'm like, yes, it's going to be hard to do that in the lifts, but it's going to happen. So for anyone who is looking for information, for any more information, there is a plethora of information out there on the internet. So if you want to look through more of the values list, how you can work your values with your goals, go ahead, have a Google. I'm sure Matt and Paul are also welcome for a little message and email if you ever want to talk to them. So this session concludes our Women in Engineering Challenging Yourself Professional Development Series. Thank you very much to all of our speakers and to everyone who has attended the workshops over the last 3 weeks. We are planning to run our annual Women in Engineering function later in the year. To keep up to date with the latest news and opportunities, connect via our social media and website. The details should be on your slide now. Excellent. Thank you again for participating, everyone. Stay safe, and we look forward to hosting you all at the next Women in Engineering Alumni Industry event again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Tring.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.